those who follow. The air always felt different in October, sharp and cold in a way that made the world seem thinner at the edges. Mark noticed it most when he walked to the cemetery after dark. The town was small enough that no one questioned a man wandering alone with his hands shoved into his jacket pockets and his shoulders curled forward against the wind. People here minded their own business. Besides, everyone knew he visited his sister. They also knew better than to ask how often. The cemetery sat at the edge of town where the street lights thinned out and the trees pressed in close. The iron gate squeaked when he pushed it open. Leaves scraped across the cracked pavement and gathered in little curls at the bottoms of headstones, and the cold carried that unmistakable smell of damp earth and old stone. Mark followed the winding gravel path to the far corner where Tracy was buried. He crouched beside the headstone and brushed away the leaves that had drifted against it. He always spoke softly when he visited, as if afraid to disturb the air around her. Tonight, he only whispered her name and let the silence answer. It had been 8 months since she died, and he still felt her absence like a bruise he kept pushing on. The stories about the Lantern Girl had circulated in town since before he was born. Supposedly, she appeared only in autumn, walking the cemetery paths with a lantern that glowed like candlelight. Old-timers swore you should never follow her or speak to her. Some said she led people to the dead, others that she led them away from the living, and no two stories agreed on what she was. Mark never cared much about local legends, but he understood grief better than anything now, and grief made a person vulnerable to stories. He stayed until the cold sank through his jeans, then rose and turned toward the gate. That was when he saw the faint glow between the headstones. It flickered at first, a tiny glint that could have been a reflection from a house window, except there were no houses on that side. The light moved, slow and deliberate. A lantern glow, steady in a wind that should have blown it out. Mark didn't breathe. A figure drifted between the stones. It wasn't walking exactly, and not quite floating, but moving with a strange, fluid grace. The lantern swayed lightly in her hand. She wore a white dress that clung to her in the breeze, though her hair didn't move at all. The trees rustled and her dress rippled faintly. Her hair remained still, pale as frost under the lantern light. Mark crouched low beside Tracy's headstone. He didn't know whether the Lantern Girl reacted to movement, but he didn't want to find out. She passed within 10 yards of him, gliding along the path with her chin tilted down and her eyes unfocused. Up close, she didn't look monstrous. She looked like a photograph left too long in the sun, her features washed out until they no longer belonged to anyone, or anything, living. She reached the bend in the path and turned without slowing. Mark stayed frozen until the light disappeared behind the hill. He waited a full minute before he stood, heart pounding in his throat. He walked home quickly and locked every door behind him. Sleep did not come easily. The next night he returned. He told himself it was only to visit Tracy as usual, not to seek anything else. Yet when the leaves rustled in that familiar, eerie way and the air grew colder near the older headstones, he felt the anticipation rise in him. He sat beside Tracy's grave for nearly an hour before the lantern glow appeared again, faint and steady as before. This time she didn't pass him by. She paused near Tracy's grave and tilted her head as though listening to something just behind her shoulder. Then her face turned slowly toward Mark. Her eyes were pale and unfocused, yet he felt she saw him. She lifted the lantern slightly, and its light warmed the ground between them. Her voice came out thin and far away, like a whisper echoing down a long hallway. "Do you want to see her?" Mark's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at him not to answer. The legend said never speak if she spoke first. He pressed his hands against the cold ground and willed himself to stay silent. The lantern girl waited, her head still tilted, her body unmoving. Then she continued walking her slow, curved path through the oldest section of the cemetery. He did not sleep that night either. He returned again and again, drawn by something he refused to name. Each night, the lantern girl's path brought her closer. Each night, her whispers grew clearer.
They wait. They listen. They are close. You can follow.
Some nights he felt Tracy's presence so sharply that his breath broke. He wondered whether the lantern girl knew his grief, whether she sensed it the way animals sense storms or birds sense the coming of winter. He began to believe that she did. On the fifth night, Mark felt hollowed out long before he reached the cemetery. He sat beside Tracy's grave and pressed his hand to the stone. The cold seeped deep into his skin. When the lantern glow appeared near the trees, he didn't flinch. He watched it grow brighter. The lantern girl approached and stopped a few feet away. Her face was calm and empty of expression, yet something about her posture spoke to him. She lifted the lantern once more and whispered the same question.
Do you want to see her?
This time, he couldn't contain the ache that rose in his chest. He whispered, "Yes, please, yes." The lantern brightened until its glow warmed his cheeks. She turned silently and began walking. Mark followed. The wind quieted, and even the leaves seemed to be holding their breath. She led him past the mausoleum, deeper into the oldest part of the cemetery. Here the stones stood crooked and worn. Many had lost their names altogether. Her lantern revealed faint silhouettes near a row of half-buried markers. Figures stood there, still and indistinct, like impressions burned into the fabric of the night itself. Their outlines wavered in the lantern light but never moved toward him or away. They simply existed in a terrible quiet that felt like a place without breath. Mark searched for Tracy among them. He didn't find her. None of the shapes resembled her at all. A cold understanding slid into him. The lantern girl did not bring the dead back to the living. She brought the living to the forgotten. Mark turned to leave, but his legs no longer responded. It felt as though something inside him had loosened, like a thread pulled free. The lantern girl raised her lantern higher. The figures turned their faint faces toward him. There was no menace in them, just an empty patience and sorrow. His body felt heavy and strangely distant, as if he were stepping out of it rather than moving through it. The lantern's glow surrounded him. He tried to think of Tracy's voice, or her laugh, or the way she used to tug on his sleeve when she wanted him to play with her when they were kids. But even those memories seemed to drift toward the cold shapes waiting near the forgotten stones. He had answered the lantern girl, and the legend had never lied about what happened next. The next evening, a boy riding his bike past the cemetery saw a pale glow through the fog. He slowed only long enough to notice that the lantern girl walked her path again, her lantern casting that steady, impossible light. A second figure followed a few steps behind her, face pale and unfocused, moving with the same slow, drifting grace. The boy gripped his handlebars tighter, kept his eyes on the road, and pedaled home as fast as he could. He didn't look back.